So when you want to stencil a Mackintosh stencil, well, first of all, check that all the pieces are out. I've just found a little bit that had been pre-cut and not popped out, and that means your design would not be complete. So I'm stenciling a design from the 1900s, that is from Stencilling Mackintosh, for a Scottish property called Windy Hill. It's actually a really nice design, which has been well celebrated. This is one of my stencils. Now, first of all, secure your stencil wherever you're going to be stenciling it. But if you're working on something nice and flat like that, there's no need to tape around everything. All you want is to prevent it from moving a little bit. So just a small piece of masking tape. This is masking tape. Now, contrary to what you might believe, masking tape really is very sticky. So before you put it down, do yourself a favor, stick it a couple of times on your clothes, and then you will notice a lot of the fluff is actually stuck at the back of the masking tape. And what this will do is it will allow the stencil to be stuck down, but it's not going to take the paper off when you try and peel it off. Because there's nothing more annoying. You've just painted a wall, you put the stencil up with masking tape, you do the job, it's beautiful, and when you take it down, actually unfortunately the paint comes off the wall, or sometimes it's on an old wall and you don't have any of this paint left. So we said before, use some absorbent tissue to dry your brush, and we'll show you what I mean by this. So you're having 2 or 3 nice brushes around, so that would be some little stubby stenciling brushes and some acrylic paint. And what we're using here is actually acrylic for craft, so it's quite watery. It's a good pigment, but when you try and dry it on your absorbent tissue, it will actually dry to quite dry. So we'll do a little tester for this. So I'm going to do a little mix of color, and I'm picking up the paint. That is as much as I need for stenciling this, okay? The very common mistake that everybody makes is that usually you use too much paint on your brush, and as soon as I've got it on my brush, I'm going to even it out. And I'm actually going to distribute it on my brush, but I'm going to also make sure that I only keep the color. I don't want the wetness. So as you can see here, it's actually, oh, you can't actually see. Let's see here. I get the color, but it's not wet. Now, with this amount of paint, depending on how much I push, and you use your wrist actually to do this, you can have a very soft color, you can have a slightly darker color, or you can have a very dark color. So you don't need to add paint to make your color darker. All you do is a bit more work with your brush. Then you start stenciling, and the movement for this, what's going to make or break a good stencil design is, first of all, not to have too much paint, but second of all, you want to turn as you go along, twist, 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 without moving your brush, and that will give you a really, really even design, okay? Now, very many people who have stenciled in the 80s used to stipple like this. Now, first of all, it's not very good for your brush, because as you're stippling, the brush bristles are folding. There's a big chance that they will go under here and obviously create a mess, but also it's very bad for your wrist if you continuously do this movement. Now, I stenciled as a business for many years, and if you are up a ladder and stencil for about 6 or 7 hours, stippling will absolutely kill your wrist. So you put your brush down and you just give it like a gentle swirl, and you don't need to push that much because you've got quite a lot of paint actually on your brush. Now, what you want to do here is you have to decide which color goes where, and I say this is pink, but obviously the foliage and the leaves are green. So there's two schools of thoughts here. Some people really quite like when the colors are overlapping. It is a little bit more natural, but some people really want to guard it. So you could put masking tape down, but there is a chance that rips your stencil. So you can just work with a little piece of paper or card, which you move around as you're stenciling, so that when you get near the area where the other section starts, you don't go over. And can you see how I'm going about this in a very soft manner, starting with the outside line of the design and going back on the inside. I put a little bit more emphasis on the corners, and that will give me some natural shading without having to use a different color. Now, what you need to look also is how far from the edge are the cuts of your stencil, because if your brush is that big and this design is quite close to the edge, when you're stenciling the edge, you go over and you end up with this like extra bit of paint on your work, which is really, really annoying. But in the case of this stencil, I made sure that did not happen. So I'm not here. Can you see how I'm not actually having to reload my brush? There is plenty of paint on my brush for now. Okay, so I keep going. When I feel that nothing is coming out, then I will reload. By far, the worst stencilers probably are the watercolor painters, because with watercolor you want to reload all the time, but with stenciling you don't. You want to go as far as you can, and then eventually when nothing comes out, you reload. There we go. Now, somebody mentioned the other day that I should have the music off when I'm talking, but actually it helps me feeling a bit less nervous about recording. So I've chosen for you a really soft music by Eric Satie, a French pianist. Now, I think he was from the 1930s, so that's a bit later than Mackintosh, but I think it's quite appropriate. Now, can you see, I still have not reloaded. I still have enough paint, although now I'm starting struggling. So I'm going to give it like another little bash. When I pick up the paint, it only goes on one side of my brush. So I'm back onto my little cloth to make sure I even it out. There we are. Okay. And back I am onto the design. Now, there is a big chance that when you go back with a lot of new paint, you have more paint than you had before, and again it makes a bit of a mess, so be very gentle. I'm barely touching the design. It's like, I think there is a word in French which is very appropriate. It's caresse, to stroke. Stroke the design with your brush. There's no need to be hard with it. Okay, and I think that's the whole flower now, so I'm quite happy with that. Now, again, with Mackintosh, there's two trains of thoughts. One that says that Glasgow style design should be really nice and flat, no shading, but actually, for having seen Mackintosh's work in Scotland in a church, I know for a fact there was quite a lot of shading, so I'm very happy to have a little bit of shading here. And I'm just going to use a couple of colors for these. Now, when it comes to doing the small part, I'm going to use two brushes. So this one, and again, see, a lot of paint. So I'm going back onto my little absorbent cloth. Now, you don't need to use paper. Some people are just passionate about not wasting paper. So you can use old rags, or if you've got some discarded bed linen, anything at all that will absorb this paint. Okay, and I would just give like a blob on the leaves. Probably start with this. Now I'm going to do something a little bit daring here when I'm done with those leaves. So same again, I have a little piece of paper that's going to guard the pink from getting green. Go. Now, one of the reasons I use very liquidish paint is because when I dry it, there is not much medium that will clog on the edge of your stencil, because when you have small pieces like this, if you have a very thick paint, like for example, if you decide to stencil with emulsion paint, that's got a very thick base, and that will probably clog up your stencil after just a few times. So I think something like craft paint is actually very appropriate. Now, saying that, quite regularly I have to stencil, when I work on commission, I have to stencil with emulsion paint. Like for example, when I was working with the Willow Tea Room, I had to do a very difficult scheme, lots of squares in the billiard room, and that was with a very thick emulsion paint. That's a lot more difficult. So you end up, a lot of the time you have to recut your stencil 2 or 3 times because the gaps are absolutely full of paint after a few times. Okay, and as I'm talking, I'm just going along. Once you've got the right amount of paint, you know, same again here, look at this, okay, then you don't actually need to spend too much time on it. It's quite a quick process. What's very exciting is when you do the first one, and then when you are decorating a room and you have about 50, the next 49 are just a bit tiresome. Okay, and that's me pretty much done. So I'm going to get to the edge here. Here we go. This is going to be quite a delicate little thing, so a little bit more paint. So that's funny because those little bits, they are much smaller than the rose, but actually because they are more stretched out, you do waste a lot of paint on the actual stencil plate. Okay. And then finally, down at the bottom here. Okay. And then the coup de maître, I'm going to take a little bit of the pink, which is here, and I'm going to pop it in the middle of the leaves just to give like a 3D effect. There you go. Et voila. So now the crunch is to detach it, so always peel little by little the masking tape, hold it at one side, and here's the big reveal. Here you are. That's quite nice, I think. Okay, your turn now.